So, we left off the last video with this basic invalidation example. So, this API has just one entity type, and that entity type is user. And we have these two queries and these three mutations. The queries each provide entities of type user, and the mutations each invalidate all entities of type user. So whenever one of these is run, every component that has one of these in that will refetch. But if you have a very complex application with a lot of queries on the screen, this might be a little bit overkill. If you have a small application and maybe two queries somewhere, this will be totally fine, because every query that is not being rendered right now will just be kicked out of the cache, and the next time you need it, it will be queried again. But if you have a lot in your application and a lot going on, maybe this is not granular enough for you, and maybe you want to go deeper, and you can. So let's look at the second notion we have for this provides here. And this needs not to be an array. This could also be a function. And looking at the arguments of this function, the first would be the return value, and the second would be the args. So with args, I mean the argument that would be passed into the query, because that could be important for us as well. And as a result of that, we could just return user, but we could also go a lot more granular here. So we could go and say we return value dot data dot map, and we say this is a single user, and that user is mapped to an object with type user and with an ID, and this ID would be user.id. So now this does not provide any anonymous user anymore, but now this query explicitly states which explicit users it depends on. So if another user would be updated, this wouldn't update anymore, but if one of the users that would be provided by this query would be updated, this would do a refetch. We can go through this and do the same down here. And here we have a little different situation. We don't even need to care about the return value here. We can just say we don't even need to care about the return value here. We can just say, okay, this provides one object of type user with the ID, and ID was our arg that we passed into our query function. So here we are not using the return value. Here we are not using the arg, but we have access to both of these. Going through this, the same goes for invalidates. So this create user query will invalidate exactly one user, and that is a newly created user. So actually, we are not really sure what this does. Let's take a look at this later. But for update user, we know what it invalidates, because it invalidates exactly that one user that we want to modify. So we can just say ID is args.id, and this is all fine and dandy. Same goes for delete user. We will exactly delete that one user. Again, here arg is just a string with the ID, so we don't have to pull it out of args. So here we can just do it like this. Now, this brings us back to create user. Yes, this creates a user, and it will definitely not invalidate any existing user, because it's just being created right now. But it still might invalidate one of our queries, because this user list might be on the last page and still have a few empty slots. So creating a new user would add something at the end of that list. And that means that we want this create user to refetch this user's query. We can do one thing here, and that is just think about an ID. So what this means is we can just add one more entity here, and that entity can be of ID, let's say list, because we just get numbers back. List will never collide with anything we have. So we will give this user's query an additional, pretty much imaginative element with the ID list. And that will not collide with anything because list is a string and this API just gives us numbers back. So let's say type is user and ID is list. And then let's just spread this in here. And TypeScript might complain because it now needs those as const. And this works. If you're not using TypeScript, you don't have to care about this too much. If you are using TypeScript, you might need some of those as const assignments there. And now we can go back down here and just say this invalidates type user with the ID list. So here this is necessary. And essentially there you have it. This is now much more granular. So if one component were to render user with the ID 5 and another were to render a user with the ID 7 and you added number 3, none of those would refetch. If one of your components would render this 3, that one would refetch. This really does just what's absolutely necessary if you go that invalidation and refetch route, which will usually just be enough for everything. So this is probably all you need to know about advanced invalidation in RTK query for now. Let's see you in the next video.